Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet another trek through the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation series. We are on Volume 11, Chapter 3. Let me just get this out there. I'm not going to say exactly because there's some people that are reading along with me, and I don't want to spoil things, but yes, even though I do spoil things within and Mushoku Monday, that's because it's going to be covered there. But anyways, I have read Chapter 7. It happened. Yes, I read that chapter. Don't look into it if you haven't gotten there yet, but I just want to get that out there, be truthful for people, and wasn't as crazy I thought it would be, honestly. Wasn't as crazy I thought it's definitely that, but anyways, just want to get that out there. As usual, thank you guys so much for supporting the channels, all that drop by for the premieres, all those in the chat, all those that leave comments if the comments are enabled, and yes, for all those that support the channel monetarily through Patreon, our tips link down there, becoming members of the channel. Had a lot of great new members, a lot of returning members of the channel last week. It means so much to me that you guys support the channel, even though it's your hard-earned money, that you're willing to part with it to give it to me in order for me to provide you guys more content. It just shows that you guys enjoy my content, which means a lot to me. Love all the words of support, even if you guys can't support that way. Love hearing feedback from you guys, all that stuff. It means a lot. But yes, having read all the way up to Chapter 7, I'm predicting 3 through 5 and then 6 and 7 for the next one. We'll see. Again, I'm going to keep things paced. The major time-consuming part is the editing, and so I want to not overburden myself. So I might record both of them, edit them separately. 3 through 5 especially, just, it's Norn. It's a lot of Norn. It's a lot of Aisha and the other perspective. We're getting the other side of the story, let's be honest, and I have a lot to talk about, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through that much, but we'll see. But as per usual, let's jump right into it with Chapter 3, The Boss and His Flunkies. A month has passed and Rudius is in homeroom. Not in the best of moods. Obviously, his mind is on his sisters, specifically Norn. Their relationship hasn't improved. In the halls, she typically ignored him or shot bad looks at him. Not that siblings had to be the best of friends. I mean, he'd still help her if she needed him. I mean, he would even take on his professors. He keeps mentioning the idea of being a helicopter parent or something like that, just hovering over the teacher like, what's going on? What are you doing with my child? His status in the school technically is useful. The bigger problem is that Norn was living in the dorms for a month and had no friends. She didn't look sad alone in the halls, but it still bugged him. Maybe she hadn't adjusted to her classes. He was worried. As he worried over this, obviously Lenny and Priscilla took note of it. They had a special present for him, and it took them a month to get it. I immediately knew what this was. I don't know why I immediately knew what this was. I sort of had a hint of what this was anyways. Linnea, with a sly smile, dropped a large, lumpy bag on the desk. But there was a catch. They didn't want him to open it while here. They wanted him to open it in private. Something was fishy. He really hoped it wasn't some sort of happy powder. He had heard a lot of that kind of stuff in the Demon Continent, and he was hoping that they didn't get that and bring it over here. Yes, Millis and Asura had strict laws against... I'm being vague. I'm using his term because of YouTube, but the happy powder. That said, he had no intentions of picking up a habit. He had no magic to kick the addiction or the withdrawals. Apparently, Saint-tier detoxification was needed to deal with that sort of thing. Plus, he had no real reason currently to escape from reality. Yes, if they handed it to him back in Volume 7, he probably would have grabbed it quick. Still, if it was that, he could sell it. He then inquired the two of them about his sister. It seemed like they knew pretty much everybody. They immediately knew about Aisha because they ran to her in the market and smelled his scent on her. But Norn, they weren't aware of. With none of his issues with Norn, Lenny and Priscilla suggested spreading word of his greatness. But he really didn't trust them to tell good stories. They'd probably tell something that would be incriminating, or they would just be too much. As he talked about her possibly having issues fitting in, the two of them fumbled over their words. This started hitting at something I was not really too happy about. They were hiding something, and he knew it. After clarifying Norn's age when asked, they sighed relief. It was obvious they did something to someone. But shifting back to their present they're giving him, they said that he couldn't be mad if it wasn't to his liking. They worked real hard on it. I guess, yes, they did. When Rudius asked Cliff nearby what he thought of the whole situation, asked his opinion on Norn, he just kind of gave a humph and discarded it as like, why do you need friends? Maybe Cliff needed a hug today. I think now, this is one of those moments where I'm reading through it now, it's like, oh, this is obviously a sign of the thing that he's now working on not working out well, which we'll get into later. His fix for Elise. But yes, it sort of plays into Cliff as a character. He spent a lot of time, up until the point that Rudius helped him with Elise, he spent that whole time alone. And in his mind, he was fine with it because he didn't need people bugging him because he was a genius and everybody was less smart than he was and he needed to focus on his studies. But yes, Rudius realized, in the end, it's not like Norn ever had to be a social butterfly. In the dining hall, Nanahoshi had begun joining them. Though she hated the food, she admitted that she introduced it. Obvious that she introduced the recipe and everything, they're just not pulling it off well. But that is interesting that now Nanahoshi is coming to eat dinner in the hall. That's a huge step for her. Again, this is kind of showing that sign that she's slowly accepting this world. But yeah, Nanahoshi point out the fact that in this world, the ingredients weren't as good as back home. Rudius made the decision to have some potato chips ready for the next time she came by for a bath. Also present here was Ginger. She was teaching Julie table manners. Something that would be pointless with Barigati around because, yes, he would be constantly cheering and giving her drinks and stuff. Again, sadly pointing out the fact that he hadn't seen Barigati for the last month. With how empty the scene felt, Rudius decided to let out a fwahaha. He doesn't say bwahahaha. It should be bwahaha. You gotta say it right, Rudius. But it got him puzzled looks, obviously. Luke even popped in the midst of it and asked what was so funny. So Rudius had to explain the fact that he was trying to summon the presence of the Demon King. But yes, Luke was there for a reason. He had a very serious look on his face, and he needed him at the student council room. Rudius couldn't say why, but it seemed like Luke wasn't too happy. And yes, after arriving at the student council room, he found out why, as he's seen Ariel with expression slightly pale and Sylphie looking anxious. Turns out, yes, Linnea and Persena were swiping Ponsu from the girl, gathering them for their boss. After noting the bag that Rudius was carrying was probably the one in question, Rudius claimed that he wasn't involved, and Ariel accepted it. She knew Rudius and Sylphie were having enough fun time together, and that something like this would not be necessary for Rudius, which yes, just turned out to be her fishing to have them pretty much confirm that they were having a lot of fun together. Ariel's clever. Still, Rudius couldn't think of why Linnea and Persena would do this. And again, like I said before, I kind of knew what this was because they said it way back here. Till he remembered them saying something about doing this just a while back. He assumed it was a joke. Why would you assume that? Have they ever done anything that was a joke? Rudius asked Ariel to let him handle disciplining them, as it seemed like a misguided attempt to be kind to him. Meanwhile, he handed the bag over to Ariel for her to return them. Ariel jokingly questioned if he's okay with parting with all of these treasures. But he assured her that he didn't have some sort of Ponsu fetish. You do, Rudius. You totally do. You've always had it. You keep talking about sniffing them and stuff. You definitely have it. After the bell rang, they exited the room and adjourned the meeting. Turning the corner, they bumped into Norn. What's the matter, Norn? Class is about to start. She turned her face away from Rudius, only to meet Ariel's gaze. Hello there. I'm Ariel, the president of the student council. With Ariel's pleasant smile, Norn's face blushed red. I'm, Norn Greyrat. Nice to meet you, Norn. Is something wrong? Your next class will begin soon. Well, I'm not too sure where the third practice room is. Ah, I see. Luke, would you show her the way, please? Of course. This way, Norn. It's not far. Luke placed his hand on Norn's back and led her down the hallway. Her face was crimson with embarrassment. She runs into pretty much Rudius, which she doesn't want to see. Then she looks away to see this beautiful Ariel. And then Ariel has Luke, this Prince Charming looking guy, take her down the hall. Is super embarrassing for her at 10. But honestly, right here, I sort of was thinking that Norn was just trying to run away, and she ended up bumping into them. Which it sort of gets into later that she's just really bad at figuring out where to go in this school. It's so big, and she gets lost really easily. Before they turned the corner, Norn looked back at them. Without a single word to him, Rudius felt a little sad. Later, Rudius met with Linnea and Persena. At first, they thought that he'd changed his mind and were finally going to go after them. But it was about the Ponsu theft, of course. They quickly started bickering back and forth about who was wrong. But still, they claimed they didn't force any girls, and they even gave them new Ponsu in exchange. Though it didn't change the fact that they were intimidating nature, probably didn't make it seem like it was a mutual exchange. I can just imagine this, Linnea just walking up to somebody saying, "Hey there, give us your Ponsu, nya. We'll get you some fresh new ones, nya." It's okay, here you go. All right, thank you, I guess. They even know the fact that it could be a problem because did they get the right sizes? Still, Linnea and Persena were terrified of Rudius. They feared punishment from him. again, they still technically, they see him as a boss because he's so powerful. And they've seen him do a lot of powerful things. They think they're dead. Not dead, but that they're going to get hurt. But yes, Rudius did recognize that the two of them were trying to do a nice thing for him. They noticed that he was feeling down and they were trying to cheer him up. That was their motivation here. Rudius had sympathy for the victims, but they meant well. They weren't setting out to humiliate anyone, like the bullies in his previous life. In the end, Ariel would take care of the victims. But he told Lenny and Priscilla that if any of them were traumatized by this, he would have them grovel butt naked in front of them. All things said, Rudius couldn't get too angry at them, which surprised him a bit. Maybe he was biased because they were his friends. This is kind of an interesting thing to sort of touch on a little bit, that Rudius is recognizing they did something bad to a lot of students, but they were doing it in a good way. So despite the fact that they seemed like bullies in his previous life, they weren't actively humiliating people, and there's a part of it that he sort of has sympathy for them because they're his friends, that he would excuse it. It's subtly touching on the idea that if your friend was a bully, would you be okay with it? Though he's not fully investing in that thought process. It's something that I was personally kind of picking up on. Tell me something though. Why the heck did you decide to get a bunch of underwear as a present anyways? They looked in confusion at the question. I mean, you worship Pantsu, don't you? Yeah, you got one pair in your special altar and everything. That's right. It was ultimately his fault. I wouldn't go that far. He shouldn't have let those two idiots lay an eye on his holy idol. Not even for a second. You got the wrong idea. I'm not worshipping the Pantsu themselves. They just belong to someone who I do worship. They're a holy relic, basically. Wait, really? We totally thought that you were in a panties cult or something. If you really feel the need to give me Pantsu, I'd prefer that you take off the ones yourself right in front of me. The two of them were shocked. Oops, maybe the last part of that he didn't need to say. They were smirking. I knew it. You just want to mate with us, boss. Well, of course he does. Deep down, he's just another dude. We're irresistible. Rudius was puzzled why they were teasing him and not acting grossed out. He didn't think they had a crush on him. It was something different. It seemed they liked him, but was different from the way that Sylphie liked him. For now, it just seemed like they had some sort of weird friendship. It's called friends with benefits, Rudius. It's friends with benefits. No, again, this is that compounding thing they keep hitting on is that Rudius himself is becoming more and more attractive. And yes, even to Lenny and Priscilla, it's just an unfortunate problem. I think there's a mixed aspect. Yes, I do believe there's an element that some people will excuse certain gross things about somebody just because they're attractive. No matter how terrible they are, they still go after them because they're attractive. They want that Prince Charming, that handsome guy. They go after Luke knowing that he's been with a whole bunch of women because he's so handsome. They want to be the one that grabs him. And so there is an element that, yeah, maybe Lenny and Priscilla excuse it because he's handsome and he's attractive. But I think for Lenny and Priscilla specifically, it's more of an aspect that they understand Rudius now. They understand what makes him great, and they understand that he has oddities. They have been with him for so long, they're accepting these weird things about him. I think Sylphie has the same regard. She accepts what's weird about him, but yes, she accepts it for a different reason. But it all comes down to the idea that Rudius is sort of missing the fact that, yes, now he's kind of attractive. He's acknowledging it, don't get me wrong, but it's still an aspect there that he's sort of not able to grasp fully yet. As they headed back, they passed Norn, who was with her class. Norn noticed Linnea and Priscilla before shooting Rudius a nasty glare. After passing by, Linnea and Priscilla gave a look none too pleased themselves. What's that kid's problem? She's got some real attitude. No kidding. We ought to teach her who's the top around here. Just so you guys know, that was my little sister. Well, good to see she's got some good spirit. Yeah, she's a real cutie too. Try to keep an eye out for her, okay? You got it, boss. We'll play nice. So shifts. We gotta teach her a lesson. Yeah, she's great. The silent treatment for Norn was starting to get to him. He at least wanted to have a basic conversation with her, but as long as she was managing on her own, he didn't want to push the issue. For a while, things were uneventful. Norn would drop by every 10 days as promised. If it took a year or two for her to warm up to him, he could live with that. However, things changed when Rudius got some alarming news. Norn had shut herself in her room. Oof. It's like the worst thing for Rudius to hear. The worst thing. And I love how they sort of portray that, which we'll get into. But yeah, that's chapter 3. Chapter 4, A Brother's Feelings. Rudius learned about it as he headed to school with Sylphie one morning. Linnea and Priscilla rushed to meet him at the gate, telling him Norn shut herself in her room and refused to come out. That is the trigger word. We always joke about the fact that TP, TP number is the trigger word for Mushoku Tensei fans, that is the trigger word for Rudius. Shut in. Sylphie immediately sprung off to the girls' dorms to look into it. Rudius, on the other hand, froze in place. He didn't chase with her. While he should have followed his wife, he was in a state of panic. The word shut in had some sort of very heavy connotation to him. He didn't know what to do. It was over the moment he locked himself up in his previous life. The outside world was a dangerous place for him, full of people who wanted to harm him. He thought he'd be bullied again if he left. He'd be miserable all over again if he re-emerged from his isolation. He'd have to find the cause of her behavior before he could change it. Memories of his past life flashed in his mind. Standing in line, punks breaking in the line, him standing up for himself, only to get beaten black and blue. That one mistake led to an entire life of a living hell. If Norn was going to go through that same situation, he'd beat down the bullies. If only it were that easy. That's the interesting thing. If only it was that easy. If only it was just some jerk in her classroom and all he had to do was just punch him in the face and boom, everything's saved. It would have been so simple. But I think even if that was the case in his previous life, that somebody came by, his brother. If his brother came by in his previous life and said, hey, Rudius, I punched those 2 guys or whatever, how many guys were being mean to you. He still wouldn't go back in because he would be getting those glares. It's the looks. It's never, his trauma seemingly is always triggered by memories of people just looking at him. They just looked at, when he first fought with Paul, it was the looks that made him want to puke. People looking at him. He didn't care if they were rich aristocrats or royalty. He'd fight them and make them live to regret antagonizing them. She possibly initiated the conflict, but whatever they did to cause this was over the line. He didn't even care if she hated him. She was part of his family. That's the brother's instincts kicking in. He's got the brother instincts are kicking in. He's gonna go fight anything. Anybody that has siblings, you know, whenever your sibling's in trouble, you'll do anything. It's one of those things where, like, my brother had something problem happen with him and he had a lot of hate going towards him. I wanted to fight everybody. I didn't even care what the situation was. I just wanted to fight everybody to protect him. Rudius headed down to the first-year classrooms with Linnea and Priscilla in tow. He had them come along because he didn't think that he himself, with his face, would be intimidating enough. The two of them seemed a little dubious about this, but Priscilla noted that he looked scary. It was probably an embarrassing situation for them, but he wasn't going to let his sense of shame stop him. Opening up the primary classroom doors, class was already on the way. "Excuse me," he said, throwing the doors open and stepping right inside. Mr. Grey Rat. We're in the middle of... I'd like a moment of everyone's time, if you don't mind." He shouldered the professor out of the way and took her place behind the podium. He looked at the surprised crowd, searching for one, picking on his sister. Who kicked her? Made fun of a sadly lonely girl from another town. As I believe most of you know, one member of this classroom was absent yesterday. What you may not be aware of is that she is my little sister. They all know that, Rudius. They all know that. He got reactions. Murmurs were all around the class. I haven't heard the details from my sister yet, but there aren't many reasons for why a kid her age would stop coming to class. I think someone in this room is probably responsible. He scanned for reactions again, some looking down. One was a delinquent he met sometime earlier. Was he the one? No. He couldn't jump to conclusions. After further pressing and analyzing, a girl raised her hand. It took serious willpower for him not to immediately fire off a stone cannon. She was a beast folk, maybe 13, a raccoon dog. I was actually talking to Norn the other day and you accidentally said something mean to her. No, it's just, I've heard a lot of stories about you, Mr. Grey Rat, but Norn's more of an ordinary girl, right? I just pointed out that you're pretty different from each other. And then she got really mad at me. Rudius thought, why would she be mad about that? She didn't want to be like him. The professor spoke up, and Rudius was shocked. But then, yes, he remembered that adults can be bullies too. Well, I was giving Norn her homework back yesterday, and she couldn't finish the assignment you dumped on her, so you made her stand naked in the faculty office for an hour? What? No, she didn't do too well on the assignment, so I told her to learn from your example and try harder next time. I thought she was going to cry for a moment, but then she nodded and said she'd do her best. Suddenly, multiple people had similar stories to share. After leaving the classroom and heading to the dining hall, Rudius took a seat and flopped forward on the table. This one really hurt. This is like one of those moments where he just jumps to conclusions. It's kind of similar to the whole situation with Linnea and Priscilla. The moment that something happens that sort of kicks this past experience, back early when he first reincarnated, he always kind of shut himself in. He was afraid of the outside. Every time he seen people looking at him, he was afraid. And Roxy helped him get out. And that kind of freed himself. But we sort of had this sort of almost, I don't want to say it's an opposite effect, but this kind of shift to how he responds to a lot of this stuff. It still shocks him. He still gets really afraid sometimes, But there's also this side where he just kind of kicks into too much. He just doesn't limit himself. Again, it happened with Linear Persona. The moment the whole thing happened with the figure, yes, it was a lot to do with the figurine, not so much them bullying Zenoba, but he did constantly remember that aspect. And he constantly told Zenoba that he'll get him back. He'll protect Zenoba. He doesn't like Zenoba being bullied. He's going to protect people. And he's done it several times with Cliff. When Cliff was being bullied, he stepped up. There's this almost aspect that he kind of pushes a little bit too far, and there's situations where he goes way too far. And this is one of those. He just assumed everything. And yes, some of it's, I think, a little bit, unfortunately, too much. But again, he was stripped naked in his previous life, so saying something like, oh, you stripped her naked and stuck her in the faculty office for an hour, he just immediately thinks of his own experience and applies it to it. When, as he's realizing very quickly, not everything's the same. It's never the same. And I like that he acknowledges that later. It's not the same situation. None of this is the same. This isn't my life. I want to keep saying I can fix this because I have experience, but it's not. I can't do that. It's never going to be the same. But going so far, even so, to say I had to fight the urge to just stone cannon somebody raising their hand because I'm just looking for the culprit. Who's the culprit? Who did it? It's got to be somebody in here. Somebody did this. It's not me. Nobody realized eventually, oh, it's me. I guess I have to stone cannon myself. Long story short, it all came back to Rudius. Every time she lost her cool, it was because someone was comparing her to him. She hated being compared to him, and hated when someone referenced him in a way of complimenting her. And it's interesting that that's not the whole story. That is not actually, you're not even on, it's like this moment where Rudius has his realization, it's like, but you're not right. But you're not right. Yes, she lost her cool whenever these things happened, but it's not for the reason that you're expecting. And I love that this writer almost tricks you, because you get Aisha's story and you get a sense of what Norn has been kind of going through with Aisha. And at some point you realize, oh, okay. And then at some point he transitions to this section, and the obvious answer is that she's mad to be compared to Rudius like she was to Aisha. And I love that later on it goes, no, it's something else. This writer did Norn's story so cleverly because it makes you keep thinking that you understand what's going on. Even when he busts into that classroom, you might have an assumption that yes, maybe it's just simple bullying. But then again, you have that pre-assumption that's been established through Aisha's story that you're assuming what's going on with Norn, and then it's not that. I love it. They weren't deliberately trying to upset her. Some of them were trying to be nice by telling her that she was nothing like her bully of a brother. In her old school, she was constantly compared to Aisha. Now, it was him. And there we go. Misdirection. Misdirection by misunderstanding of Rudius. It wasn't enough that there was a pantsu incident recently. Ariel did a great job following up with the victims. Most could look back on it and laugh. It seemed that somebody seen this whole thing happening from a distance and gave an exaggerated account on what happened. So it seemed like they were willing to give their pantsu. Joking. When Norn heard about this, she may have thought not only was she inferior to her brother, but a pervert of a brother. He was an idiot. Barging in there like that, he apologized to Lenny and Priscilla. But they didn't think he was stupid. Well, kind of stupid. He was looking after his family. He couldn't muster up a smile at their usual comedy routine. That aside, he had to think of something. The longer she was locked up, the more you regret it and wish you could go back. Again, this is where he's applying his own experience to her. Regrets build up over many years until 2 years or maybe 10 years slip by. Then, by some point, it's too late to undo any of the choices you made. I do appreciate this concept because it sort of applies to a lot of things in lives. People, you make decisions and it makes it difficult to undo those decisions. I mean, a prime example is what you study in life, what your goals are in life, what your job's like in life. This can apply to many things. The further you go into it, the more you feel like you can't turn back. Maybe it's even walking away from something that you cherish. And the further you're away from it, the more you think you can't turn around and say, I messed up, let me fix that. Friendships and bonds, which is similar to the idea of a shut-in. How many times he pushed away his friend? How many times he pushed away his brother? And maybe at some point realizing I can't fix what I just pushed away. They won't accept me now. They've walked away. He figured it's part of why so many parents push their kids so hard. I guess this is where it kind of gets into that. Sorry. I think of something and then I forget, oh yeah, that's right, he talks about that something. Parents push their kids to push towards some goal or something good because they're afraid their kids will have the regret they had. Everyone has regrets. You take those out on others sometimes. Tell me something, you two. Let's say you were less talented than your siblings, and people won't stop reminding you about that fact. What's the best thing you can do about it? I don't know, boss. The two of us are pretty talented, you know? Yep, we're not too shabby about anything. Wait, weren't they shipped off to here because they were dumb and lazy? Whatever, they lacked self-awareness, clearly. It was partly, he also wanted them to learn the responsibilities, but yes, it was partly because he felt like the entire tribe was full of soldiers that were too weak. Oh, I do know somebody like that, though. Aunt Ghislaine. She used to be a thug who went around starting fights, but then she started training, and then she ended up becoming a sword king. Okay, that's not a bad example. She was a good example. There was a chance that Norn had something special that they didn't discover yet. Something Rudius and Aisha couldn't compete with. If she didn't want to be compared, she could do something that neither of them tried. She could find some field of interest outside of magic and swordplay. There was a risk that she wouldn't be talented in it, similar to Zenoba, but despite his lack of talent, he enjoyed life. I think this is an interesting route to go, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily fix the problem. Yes, if she focuses on something else, there's still a lot of people that will claim that that thing isn't as significant as what you're doing. Say Norn decides to study under Nanahoshi for summoning spells, which if she does, don't say anything, chat. And she starts to learn about how to do summoning spells really well. That doesn't necessarily mean that people won't say that Rudius was more special because he blew up a Demon King. But yes, if she does achieve something, that would be interesting. But even here, he's noting the idea that she doesn't have to be super talented as long as she's doing something else. But I do agree with the idea that if you're still following the same route, you're going to be compared more often. Still, and yes, this is the major comparison here, this may not work for Norn. Arguments like this didn't work on him before. But how am I supposed to talk to her about all this? Don't overthink it, boss. Barge right in there and give it to her straight. Yep, just tell her to get her butt back in class. They made it sound so simple. But maybe he was overthinking the details. She was only 10, perhaps just sulking. It had only been 2 days. Maybe it was too soon to call her a shut-in. Spending some time alone when you're feeling down isn't unusual. And there's one of those moments where it's like, I wonder if Refusion is just trying to trick us and trick Rudius, and the idea of maybe she just has a tummy ache and she doesn't want to tell anybody. And it's like he's blowing this way out of proportion because all he heard was shut in and he blew up. But there's the fear right there. Rudius thinks every second, every minute, every hour, you're further and further into your own regret and you can't turn back. He wants to nip it in the bud now. Get her out of there. It's too dangerous. The room is like a black hole for Rudius. It's a symbolism of chains and shackles. Norn was obviously struggling. He'd been telling himself they needed space. But was that true? Maybe he was avoiding the issue. He could have been actively supporting her, helping her adjust. This hands-off approach was easier, but it didn't mean that it was a better choice. It would be different if she was older, but she was only 10. Giving her more attention than she wanted was probably the right cause. I kind of agree with that because all of these strangers, like, you know, technically Rejured and other characters later, just by patting on the head, suddenly she's like, oh, this is great. And yes, it depends on the person and what she kind of sees in them. There's an element that she needs to get past this sort of barrier, but she appreciates that. Yes, she is a normal young girl. Granted, all anime girls like head pats, let's be honest. With that, he headed to Norn. He knew he was the last person that she'd want to listen to, but he wasn't going to drive himself crazy thinking about that. He had to hear her out. Problem was, he needed to get to the girls' dorm. Yeah, you have people like Goliad. It's not going to let you in. A covert operation was needed with the aid of Sylphie, Ariel, Linnea, and Priscilla. Sylphie was obviously apologetic to Rudius, not keeping her promise that she'd keep an eye out on Norn. But it seemed Norn didn't want to talk to her. He explained all that he'd learned, but Sylphie felt Rudius shouldn't blame himself. Despite her being right, he needed to fix the situation. At dinner, Ariel drew crowds to the dining hall with an impromptu speech. Rudius slipped into the dorms, entering through Linnea and Priscilla's room. Trying to adjust his eyes to the dark room, he ended up grabbing one of Priscilla's bras. Linnea offered him to take it with him, but he discarded it. From there, he got into a laundry cart that was full of Sylphie's sheets, and he was carted down till he reached Norn's room. On the way, Rudius wondered if he'd even be able to help Norn. While he experienced being a shut-in, he never heard an argument that coaxed him out. This is that point where he's realizing, yes, I have this experience. I'm so like her right now. Like, we're both experiencing the same thing. She's experiencing what I experienced. I should know the ins and out of being a shut-in. But while he knows what kept him in there, He doesn't know what got him out, besides his brother busting in there and punching the crap out of him and kicking him out. He's not gonna do that to Norn. I guess he could. Just find her computer in there, smash it, and then kick her out. But then she'll get hit by a cart and isekai'd. We don't know if we want that. Arriving at Norn's room, he went inside and lit a candle. He seen Norn sitting on her bed, holding her knees to her chest, staring right at him. He sat down, wondering what to say. Reese thought, what did I want said to me? He couldn't remember. All his rehearsing beforehand evaporated from his mind. All he could remember was what he hated hearing. Things that he didn't want to say to her. Like, my way or the highway. You're going back to school right now. I'm paying your tuition for a reason, young lady. Stop making a nuisance of yourself. Maybe Lydia Percento was right. A slap upside the head was probably the simplest. She was only 10, so maybe doing something like that was what would make her do what he wanted. But that would be the opposite of a long-term solution. And it would be an extremely dangerous to do based on what we find out from Norn's perspective. That would be the thing to make her never trust you ever again. Ever again. But again, that's not a long-term solution. Another incident like this can occur again, and she would grow more defiant. It was his fault that she was there. He had no right to lecture or hit her. If anything, he owed her an apology. Not that would change anything. Rumors would go away and she'd keep being compared to him. Norn, they both fell silent. He felt like he missed his chance. I like that the two people speaking up at the same time, it's like, damn it, she was just about to say something and I interrupted her. Now I can't get her to say anything again. I'm sorry, Norn. It hasn't been easy for you, has it? You finally got to a new school, but now everyone's pestering you about me. I'm not even sure what to say, honestly. I guess I don't really even understand you that well. There was no response. He was fighting for words. He didn't even know anything about her. He kept his distance and told himself not to pry. He didn't even try to get to know her. This is that painful realization moment of that idea that he thought he was doing the right thing by kind of giving her distance, but there's also a negative effect to that. I think even at some point in the next chapter, she sort of points that out. Like, oh, I guess he was okay with me going to the dorms because he wanted to get rid of me. There's almost an element of her just being like, I kind of want him to spoil me. I kind of want him to hug me, and he's not. But yes, the entire perspective of Norn was, I'm afraid of this guy. I'm so afraid of him. He's gonna hit me. He's gonna hit me. But there's a side that we keep seeing of Norn where she just wants to be loved. Norn is such I guess the picture I'm getting more of Norn is that she's so much more soft. She's so much more emotional, and she's so much more desiring attention. Yes, Aisha needs attention too, but there's like this scale aspect where it's a little bit more heavy or on Norn's side. And so there's an element of fixing a situation by one way, but you could almost feel like it could have been this simple. But I like that even here he acknowledges that I should have tried to get to know her. Maybe I didn't do enough, which is like the biggest massive regret that you can possibly have with people, especially loved ones. I know this must be hard for you, but I'm not sure what to do. Still nothing. He didn't even know what she was thinking, or if she was even listening. Was this a lost cause? Should he just back down and wait for Paul to get here? Maybe seek out help from people that he knew? Maybe Nanahoshi or Ellen Elise. He suddenly found himself remembering something his brother said. This part hurt. This part hurt so bad. And this is a lot to do with the fact that I have brothers. It's a lot to do with the fact that I have brothers. He remembers something that his brother said when he used to come to see him when he first shut himself in. He said life always has its ups and downs, you know. But there are people out there who have it worse than you. Things might be tough right now, but if you just run away from all of your problems, you'll keep running forever. That's much worse in the long run. You don't have to go back to school right away, but why don't you at least try coming out to have lunch with me? I think there's so... Okay, let's acknowledge the fact that his brother kept trying. This is the brother that literally in the end busted up his stuff and kicked him out. Some point, he kept trying. He was trying to reach Rudius in his previous life. But there's a lot of really difficult words in what he says. They're truthful. They're trying to help. And they're all coming from a perspective of trying to help Rudius come out. But there's some words in here that, if taken wrong, have the reverse effect. Some people have it worse than you. I don't care about them. It's tough right now, but if you just keep running from your problems, you'll keep running forever. What do I care? I want to get away from those things. You don't have to go back to school, but you can at least come out to have lunch. But then I'm giving in. There's so many things that there's a reverse effect. And I think every single one of those, I think Rudeus has pretty much mentioned at some point. In Rudeus's mind, he answered those words by spitting in his face. But in reality, he ignored him. Still, his brother kept spending time in there, delivering his speeches, watching Rudeus closely, looking like he had something more to say. But Rudy kept ignoring him, confident he couldn't understand his feelings. Maybe this was how his brother felt back then. They'd sit there for hours in silence until he'd leave. After a while, his brother stopped showing up. Others would visit instead. Maybe he arranged that. In the end, he ignored everything. This may be a crucial turning point. Sorry, it's written in there. If he backed out now, Rudeus had a terrible feeling she may stay there forever. He couldn't turn and run. Not this time. Again, I love the constant acknowledge that they're not the same, but they're the same. And right now, what he's saying right there is that my brother used to come in there and would sit there and stare at me and keep delivering these speeches and keep saying things. And he was probably struggling for words too. And he would probably have the same feelings that Rudeus had right now. He's literally living what his brother went through. Sitting there, staring at Norn, wondering if she's listening, and wondering if inside of Norn's head right now, she's spitting at me because I don't know how she feels. Is she feeling what I felt? At the same time, acknowledging that at some point, my brother left and never came back, and I never was able to recover. Sort of indicating a side that maybe if his brother stayed there, he could fix it. But still, it comes down to, I can't leave this chair because she's going to feel like I walked away. I have to do sort of what my brother wasn't able to do, but how do I do that? He never said anything that worked. Nobody said anything that worked. But at the same time, again, acknowledging that this isn't the same. I like that. And I think even though he might have had something in his previous life that may have worked, would it even work on Norn? Probably not. She has completely different experience. She's a completely different age. She's a different gender, everything. Chapter 5, Norn Grey Rat. This is where, this is like literally probably going to be most of the video, so I'm kind of afraid this is going to go really long because it depends on how long I spend on this chapter. But this is where things started punching me. Left hook, right hook, uppercut, everything. Woof. Norn wasn't sure when she started to be afraid of Rudeus. I like that. Interesting. The moment I read that, I'm like, wait, afraid? Not hate? I guess it makes sense. She wasn't sure when she became afraid of Rudeus, but it wasn't that way from the start. The first time they met, he was hitting her father. Again, because she was too young back here, she doesn't even remember him. Norn loved her dad, even if he had huge flaws. He always put her first. Years later, she can recognize that her father provoked the fight. Rudeus had completed a long journey, and father provoked him harshly. Interesting that she's noting this. She actually knows the truth. But at the same time, all she's seen was her brother sitting atop him, punching him. All she could think of was that he was going to kill her father. That's all that mattered to her at the moment. She wasn't going to accept that monster as being part of the family. She wasn't afraid of him, though. She hated him. And that's where it kind of corrects it. Like, okay, so I was right. Back here, she just hated him. It wasn't a fear. I think she still had a fear of him, but she was more hated him. She kept hating him long after that. And it didn't help that people kept complimenting him. Father, her sister, even the family maid. Ugh. And so it starts. And so it starts. We get the true side of Norn. Even the family maid. That's mean. But again, that's what Lilia wants to be known by. She has no relation to her. At school, Aisha insisted on constantly competing with her. She challenged Norn in the classroom and on the field, beat her soundly, and rubbed her nose in her failures. With Aisha around, she spent every day feeling like a loser. Norn felt like she could never be Aisha's friend. Here's where it all starts. We see the other side of the argument. Again, technically from Aisha's perspective, when she was in that town, she was being told that she was illegitimate, and Norn was pampered. And so what that causes, because we have Norn here and she's being pampered by grandma, and grandma keeps talking about how great she is and that this is the illegitimate daughter. You're great. You're going to be great in the future. All that stuff. You get out of here. Why are you in here? You're this nasty thing that shouldn't exist. And so when they go into school, it's almost like Aisha's trying to overcome her to prove that she's better than her. and to basically get back at her. Well, if I'm not good in the eyes of our family, I'll be better than you everywhere else. Norn's grandmother was aware of the state of affairs and didn't like it one bit. And there's where it happens. Aisha's doing this at school, and now suddenly Norn's grandmother gets mad about it, causing her to have nothing but contempt for Aisha, who again, she calls illegitimate. But things weren't totally rosy with Grandma, as we find out. As a lady of the Ch3-5 family, grandmother had high expectations for Norn, meaning Norn had to be competent at the very least. Norn was put through etiquette classes and lessons to prepare her for specific ceremonies. Nothing came natural for Norn. She failed and was scolded on a daily basis. So even though you might have felt it, Aisha, Norn, it wasn't pretty and all roses for Norn. Whenever she embarrassed herself, her grandmother would mutter, "I suppose that adventuring business must pollute the blood as well as the spirit." Richard, go do it. Richard, go do it. Just take them all out. Go do it, Richard. There's no saving the Ch3-5 family. There's gonna be let's just drop a displacement incident on the Millis. Oh. It was both an insult to Mom and Dad. Paul worked hard for Norn, so it didn't take long for Norn to hate grandmother as well. So it wasn't a shock that Norn followed father when Roxy showed up with the location of mother. With a mother in the Millis aristocracy and father from a Asura noble house, she had a good lineage at least. For that reason, her grandfather was willing to take her in their household on a permanent basis, but Norn cried and pleaded until eventually she got to go with Paul. Yet, in the end, Paul sent her off to live with Rudius, due to it being dangerous from now on, saying he would join up with her once he found mother. She cried and refused. If it wasn't for Richard showing up, she may have worn her father down eventually. Then, I like this. Then she acknowledges that then later on, she'd probably got sick or injured in Begarit and would only cause all sorts of problems. Again, I like the idea of at least you're getting a sense from all this stuff that Norn is thinking through this stuff. Yes, she is spoiled. Yes, she's frustrated. But yes, she's going through so much terrible crap. And at the same time, this seems like the safe route to her. Despite everything that's going on, yes, Millis, technically she would probably have been safer. But still, this was the best bet. This was the only thing that she could fully 100% say, I'm going to be okay. As long as I'm with Paul, my only stability this whole time, I don't care what I'm going through. I kind of still want to stay here. Richard was kind both the first time she met him and the second time. He ended up persuading her to do the right thing. So she ended up heading north to her brother's home. Once they departed, Aisha dropped the good girl act and started acting like a leader, coming up with all sorts of crazy plans. Norn thought that she was being stupid, trying to take charge of two grown-ups, but Richard and Ginger took her seriously and tried most of her ideas. Aisha's opinions carried more weight. It was unfair. Most of Norn's ideas were basically ignored. The only thing that got her through it was Richard, who comforted her and listened to her complaints. Papa Richard is always good. However, even he complimented Rudius, calling him remarkable man and how he looked forward to seeing him, smiling as he talked about him, even though he almost never smiled. The Rudius she knew and Richard knew were completely different. Perhaps that's when she started to be afraid of Rudius. It's so interesting. I think at this point my mind is kind of wandering these ideas of, wait, is it because she believes that he's good at manipulating people? Is it because he's able to control and change somebody that seems strong like Richard? Is it because she's afraid because she doesn't understand Rudius? That he's this anomaly that can't be understood? There's so many things that were running through my head at this point. But it comes down to really, I think, how Richard explains him. He was a powerful magician, worthy of respect. Everyone said so. He was also the one that beat up her father. He was violent. There it is. And there was no guarantee he wouldn't hit her too. This made her afraid of living with him, constantly waking up in the middle of the night, trembling. However, Richard would always comfort her these nights, telling stories of his past. Even if they were mostly sad stories, she would always end up falling asleep. And here's where everything goes downhill. Upon reuniting with Rudius, he was drunk and clinging to a woman. She was apparently a childhood friend from Buena Village, but she didn't remember her at all. Although she did vaguely remember some sort of kid that was with Aisha and Lilia. But that girl was nothing like this Sylphie. She must have changed over the years. Rudius was clearly enjoying himself to the fullest. Here's where the big slap in the face moment where it's like, oof, yep, technically you're right, but we know why. Rudius was clearly enjoying his life to the fullest here. It made Norn angry seeing that. Her father wasn't playing around with women for years and years, putting everything on hold until he found their mother. He hadn't even touched Lilia. Rudius' priorities, on the other hand, was his own happiness. But Norn couldn't bring herself to say anything. She was afraid of him, and figured Rijerd would take Rudius' side as he seemed happy to see him. Then the next day, Rijerd left. She really thought that he would stay longer. I'm going to stop here because I do like what Norn is sort of paralleling here. What happened way back when Rudius was reunited with Paul? What made Paul so angry? While I was suffering and trying to find and put back together our family. Again, at that time, all Paul had was Norn. They didn't know where Lilia was, didn't know where Aisha was, didn't know where Zenith was. He was afraid he would never find everybody, and he was searching and finding everybody else's family, but not his own. And it was destroying him, and he was drinking and everything to try to keep himself together. And then Rudius showed up, and he was happy. He was telling these grand stories, and that made Paul angry. Norn is experiencing the same exact thing. Norn is literally angry at Rudius, just like Father was. Father made that mistake at that point to lash out at Rudius, and he accepts that that was a mistake. Norn is falling into the same path as Paul. I am experiencing how hard this is to find Mother, and Father's falling apart. And they had some argument back here. I don't know what happened, but I'm so angry. And now, jump forward to her arriving here. She knows what happened back there, but she's falling into the same steps here. She heard the whole story, but she's doing the same thing. Rudius is here. He has a wife. He has a home. He has friends. Everybody's happy. He's drunk. They're all happy-dory. He smells like alcohol. He's having fun here while Father is suffering. Everybody's suffering down there trying to find Mom. What are you doing, Rudius? Why aren't you helping Dad? Do you not care about Mom? What are you doing up here? Just going on with your life? Have you forgotten about us? That's what's going through her head right now. She's doing the same thing Paul did. But I still like the fact that even later on, Rudius even himself acknowledges, what the hell have I been doing? Is this punishment because I've been putting all that stuff off and finding my own happiness? But we know, and I think even Rudius himself acknowledges, but Ellen Elise told me everything's fine. Why are you mad? I was told everything's fine. So I moved on with my life. The parallels. Andrew always loves the parallels. But yes, once Rijerd left, she was alone. Aisha was overjoyed with being with Rudius. Sylphie seemed nice enough, but she wasn't on Norn's side. She had no one on her side. She was stuck there for months in fear. Aisha always said it was Norn's fault for not doing anything right. Said she didn't put in the effort, but there was things that she couldn't do, no matter how hard she tried. Even if she wanted to improve, put it in practice, she couldn't compare to Aisha. This is that kind of sad aspect of like, okay, if I put a lot of effort into this, I could be good at this. And then that'll show Aisha that she's wrong. I can do something. But then as she's doing it, Aisha would come in and would be able to do it better. You could never win, no matter how much work you put in. And even she's even sort of acknowledging the idea that I just can't figure things out like Aisha. I'm not a genius. No matter how much I practice into something, she'll always do it better. But acknowledging that she at least was trying. For now, all she could do was hide away and hope no one would get mad at her. Hope no one would tell her how inferior she was and get tossed out in the cold. Then, Rudius decided that Norn would attend at a university. She feared being compared to Aisha again, but thankfully, Aisha wasn't going to attend. But even still, she's not going to pass some entrance exam to a university with like all different ages, especially without studying first. But then Rudius said something that was thoughtless and rude, that he would buy her a spot. This turned into an argument, obviously, between her and Aisha, which led to Rudius speaking out at both of them in a cold tone. She thought he'd punch her, which made her cry a little bit. Was this her new life? Constantly flinching in fear? I think even he noted right there that he was a little bit too stern. He's like, man, that came out a little bit too rough. And she acknowledged it. And that was that point where she's like, here it comes. Just like father. He's going to lay me on the ground and start beating me. On the day of the exam, Rudius told them about the dorms. This sounded like the solution to her problem. With Aisha not attending, she wouldn't have to see them anymore. No one to compare her to, and she'd be able to live her own life. After they got the results, she spoke up, even though she feared he would get angry. Dad probably told them to live together in his letter, so he may hit her. But he agreed immediately. It was Aisha that got angry, saying it was unfair. Norn acknowledges here that up until now, Aisha got the better treatment than her. Still, she couldn't understand why he agreed to this. But this is the realization point for Norn. Looking back on this, Norn realized that he never got upset with her, except for when she fought with Aisha. And I hate that it feels like, oh, maybe he is nice. No, she thinks differently. Maybe he wasn't interested in her at all. Maybe she was a nuisance to him, seeing a gold opportunity to kick her out. It was convenient for her in the end. But the thought made her a little sad. And there was the stinger. The moment I read that line, I was like, she wanted you to pay attention to her. She wanted love. And you thought distance. And yeah, granted, I'm not saying that the moment that Norn showed up with Rajerd, if Rudius threw his arms around her, that she'd go, oh, he does love me. There's a chance. But it is at least acknowledging this idea that she feared him. She hated him, feared him, but also kind of wanted just to be loved. She's always just wanted to be loved. Norn is such a love wanter. She just wants to be... Norn is just very soft and she wants to be loved. Living in the dorms was exciting to her. She had a roommate, a demon named Marissa. Grandmother said demons were evil, which she probably would have believed if she had never met Rajerd. Marissa welcomed her and helped her despite her being thrown in midterm. Later, she met some scary-looking demon girls from the self-defense squad, Goliad. They introduced themselves, which was fine. They talked about the fact they're all one big family. She was intimidated, but Marisa told her that she was a good-hearted person who took her responsibilities seriously. Classes were difficult as the teachers explained things differently than back at Millis. Plus, she was jumping midway through the year, so lectures were hard for her to follow. Also, in Millis, there was a lot of classes about religion, which is not really the case here. It was more practical lessons in magic. She wasn't good at those, and the professors didn't bother explaining the basics. With fears of her being dragged back to Brother's house because she failed, she would study back at her room. Even that wasn't helping, and she was at the end of her rope. Marissa was nice enough to help, which helped to get her head around the concepts that were supposed to be learned in class. She even noted the fact that Aisha probably would have figured this stuff out really easily. Sometimes, Norn hated herself for being so stupid. I sort of see a little bit of parallels with the whole thing with Edis. You know, like how Edis always mentioned the fact that she's bad at thinking and she's kind of dumb. It kind of has a little bit of parallels with Norn. I'm not saying they're the same character. Please stop saying, oh my gosh, you're comparing these two characters. They're completely different. I like these little simple things that are similar between characters. It's not to say they're the same characters, but it really does hurt. This idea that Norn is trying and she just is like, I hate the fact that I'm stupid. I hate that thought process that somebody believes they're just dumb and they're not. They're just not excelling like somebody else, and they're not in a situation where it's good for them. Again, she's being thrown midterm into some university that's for a lot of different ages. And the teacher to stop and explain to a 10-year-old normal girl everything is hard to think about. Here's where we find out what happened with Norn and getting lost. Yes, the campus was large, and she got lost a lot. She even bumped into Rudius with someone really important. It was embarrassing. Everyone there was afraid of Rudius. Word was that he was a boss of a gang of 6 thugs that did anything that he wanted. 2 were in the dorms with Norn. Tall, scary-looking girls that strutted around like they owned the place. Marissa warned her to avoid them. Norn later learned that Rudius ordered them to go around and collect ponzu from cute girls. Did his wife know about that? Probably not. The thought made Norn mad. While Dad was risking his life to save Mom, he was playing around. Her opinion of him kept lowering, despite his reputation being positive. And here's where I think everything starts to really shift in her mind. People said that he never picked on ordinary students, never harassed people. He also told tough kids to leave the weaker ones alone. He was better at magic than anyone in the university and a good teacher. He was even apparently teaching a girl younger than Norn. Classes, teachers, and even Marissa told Norn to follow in his footsteps, to be like the brother she feared and hated. She didn't want to be like him. It hurt knowing she couldn't compare to him. He was better at everything, just like Aisha. So it's all over again for her. I thought I'd get away because we moved from Millis and Aisha's not joining here. And I immediately knew that, like, you're going to get compared to him anyways. But nope, here I am again. Same thing. But I think it hurts to her more now than before. Yes, before she was being compared to somebody that was deemed as the illegitimate child, but I don't think she fully felt that nasty nature that the grandmother did. It's different between her and Aisha than what her grandmother to her. But now it's being compared to somebody that she literally hates. Yes, she hates Aisha, but not in the same way. Returning to the dorms one day, a big jumble of emotions had been growing inside of her for weeks. Bitterness, sadness, self-pity, anger, and who knows what else. She couldn't hold them back anymore. Couldn't stop from breaking down. Marissa asked what was wrong, but Norn told her it was nothing. Was she wrong about Rudius? Or was everyone else wrong? There's the big question mark. There's the golden question mark. Who's wrong here? It can't be everyone. Maybe the problem was her. Maybe she is wrong. You're sort of right. You haven't said too many things wrong at this point. The question more is what outweighs other things? That's the golden question there, Norn. She was young the day Rudius punched Father. While Father tried to explain that he'd been going through a lot, she could never understand what that was supposed to mean. But now, it finally made sense. Norn was going through a lot herself now. If she worked hard, turned things around, cheered up, it would suck to have someone mock you as having such a carefree life. Norn would probably punch them, even if it was Father. Even Norn saying that says a lot. She's putting herself in Rudius' shoes right here. I'm going through some crap right now. What if I turned things around and it was great, and then suddenly somebody came up and said, "Oh wow, you're having a lot of fun, aren't you?" She'd get mad. Oh, that's what Rudius feels. I sort of follow that same mindset. That's why Rudius got mad. And Father said that he was right to get mad. Now it's all starting to make sense to her. Every path is converging. It's clicking. Deep down, Rudius and her were probably similar people. Don't go that far, girl. Let's come back, girl. Dial it back. Come back. He wasn't an inhuman monster after all. That said, how was she supposed to confront him now? What would he want from her? How did he make up with Dad anyways? Now she's sort of realizing, okay, this kind of blew up and they figured things out. So how did they figure that out? Can I do that same thing? You need to have a bartender come up and place down a glass and say, "Hey, Norn, why don't you look Rudius in the face?" She thought and thought some more, but nothing came to mind. Her belly began to hurt, stomach cramping up painfully. She became nauseated and burrowed deep in her bed. She couldn't do anything, couldn't even bring herself to face her brother. Before, Dad was there to comfort her. Later, Rijerd took his place. But here, she had no one like that. If Bodygotti was around, I think he would say, "Bah, little girl, come over here. Drink up. Be merry." That's all Norn need. That's all she needed was just a Bodygotti to say, "Bah." Yes, Marissa was nice, but she wasn't on her side. Again, she believes that Marissa is on Rudius' side, and she needs somebody on her side. Even if she is accepting that Rudius is a good person, she needs somebody that's going to be able to bump her forward, not somebody that would pull her forward. Marissa had suggested that she talk to Rudius and go back to class. She already knew that. The problem is, her body didn't want to move. After days of thinking in circles, passing out, repeating, eventually she found herself sitting at the edge of her bed with Rudius in front of her. Norn, it felt like that was the first time she ever spoke his name. Apparently, she wasn't hallucinating. But how did he get into the girls' dorm? For a while, they just stared at each other. Being the first time she looked closely at his face, he looked anxious. His features reminded her of Dad, which was reassuring. But of course, they look alike. It hurts. It hurts because there's two aspects here. Yes, it's saying of course they look alike. They're father and son. Of course, Rudius is going to look like Father. But note the anxiousness. That was the thing that she obviously has been seeing so much of as Paul has been fighting to find their family. She's seeing her father and Rudius sitting there trying to figure out, what do I do right now? What do I do to fix the situation right now? But more so, she didn't see anger. She didn't see a cold face. She didn't see something threatening. She's seen somebody that obviously looks like they're trying to do something. Was it just her, or was he really nervous? That reminded her of Dad too. Rudius fell silent again, sitting there, not even moving an inch. Dad would have probably wrapped his arms around her by now. Again, she just wants somebody to... she just wants a head pat. That's all Norn wants. She wants a head pat. Rejured would have patted her head, but Rudius didn't even approach her. She suddenly understood why. He was too scared she would reject him. Then the negative emotions began to melt away. She didn't hate him anymore. Couldn't find him scary either. He was too much like her dad. He was never going to hit her, no matter what. He thought about it. He thought about it, Norn. He thought about it, Norn. Thinking and doing is two different things, I know. But I like this right here, though. I love this because it's that moment that she realized. I think the main key thing here is Norn seen Rudius broken. Seen Rudius anxious. Seen Rudius something besides this confident person or angry person. She finally seen him sitting there anxious. Now, I kind of argue that if she looked, I guess is the main key thing, if she looked into his face all this time before that they've been reunited, she probably would have seen it at some point. He's been trying to figure out what to do with Norn for a while now. I mean, Linnea and Percent has seen it. Now she's looked and sees it. Especially now because he's terrified. He's more terrified now than ever. Don't become me. Please don't become me. Please don't be a shut-in. Please don't do what I did. Please don't do what I did. What do I say? What do I say? It's hitting her. But, like mentioned, also not moving. He's not moving an inch. He's just sitting there. She needed to forgive him. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and her throat quivered. I'm sorry, Rudius. I'm sorry. Rudius slowly and cautiously sat down next to her, gently putting his hand on her head, then hugged her to his chest. He was warm, and he smelt like Dad, too. She cried in his arms for the rest of the night. Finally, super good. I love it. And I love, like I said earlier, I love so much that he doesn't even do anything. Yes, he does something. And I like the fact that, like, right after this, he literally says, Rudius in the end believes he didn't do anything. All he did was came in there and sat down, said that he didn't know what to say and didn't understand her and whatever, then everything fixes. What the hell? Okay. Everything good? I don't know. I didn't do anything. It's so great that it's simply, no, Rudius. You just came there, sat down, and tried. You showed her that you came there to help her. You didn't come in there, bust open the door, smack her around, and say, get back out there, which is exactly what she thought you would do. All you did was came in there, sat down, and expressed that you don't know what to do. That's all she needed. She needed to see you. She needed to see your face and see that you were scared, just like Father. You needed to see that you were just like Father, that you would not raise your hand at her. It's all she needed to see. But I like the fact that, again, like I mentioned earlier, everything is assumptions shattered over time. Again, the initial impression is that Norn hates Aisha, hates Rudius, comes here, wants to get away from them. Oh yeah, Rudius goes in the classroom and realizes, oh, it's because she's being compared. Yes, technically, she's shut in because she's being compared, but it's so much more than that. It's more that she's being compared, and she realized at some point that Rudius wasn't a bad person. It's a swell up of a lot of things, and yes, part of it's because she's being compared, but it's because she's being compared and she's realizing she's wrong and she doesn't know what to do and everything's welling up and she's being compared again and all this stuff is building up to the point where it breaks her. What was the decision point? Returning home to the dorms one day, a jumbled up emotions built up inside of her and she couldn't hold it back. Bitterness, sadness, self-pity, anger, and who knows what else. She couldn't hold it back anymore. The breaking point was when she realized, is everybody wrong about Rudius? Or am I wrong? I have to go talk to Rudius, but I can't. That was the break point. She didn't shut herself in because she was being compared. She shut herself in because she was wrong, and she didn't know what to do to fix it. That's the misconceptions that we get based on what Rudius is trying to figure out as he goes along. Like I said, it's so clever how it keeps shifting. Initially in Millis. Oh, because Rudius punched Paul and she loves Paul. Well, why is she mad when she first arrived here? Oh, because Aisha and her keep bickering about whether Rudius is cool or not. Well, why does she want to go to the dorms? Well, obviously because she wants to get away from Rudius. Well, why is she shut in? Well, obviously because she keeps getting compared to Rudius that she hates. It keeps shifting. Now we realize it's because she felt she was wrong and she wanted to fix it. And that's why Rudius didn't technically have to do anything that he thought that he had to do to fix it. He didn't have to beat up anybody. He didn't have to drag her out of there. He didn't have to apologize. He didn't have to hug her. I mean, yes, he could have hugged her, but it's so good. I love it. Cutting to Rudius' perspective, he thinks, what, in the end, I didn't really do anything. Norn didn't tell her what was going on or what she was upset about. She just cried for a long time and then said that everything would be okay now. That was it. But she did look okay for once. She even managed to look him in the eyes. He felt enormously relieved after all that, where it was probably just, it literally, like I said, from the moment that he reaches the gates and they say, shut in, it's like this dread just hits him and he just stuck in that all the way up to the point where she finally says, I'm okay. So with that, he left the rest to Sylphie and slipped out. After that, Norn was noticeably more cheerful. Well, not dramatic. She started saying hi to him when they passed each other in the halls. She wasn't hanging on to him like Aisha, and they didn't talk a bunch. She was probably still being compared to him, but it didn't seem like it bothered her anymore. Still, in the end, he didn't do anything meaningful at all. Again, you were there. It made him feel pathetic. He knew what it was like to be looked down on and isolate yourself, but he failed to come up with anything to say. She must have worked it out herself, processed her feelings, and pulled herself over an obstacle. That was seriously an impressive accomplishment. Yes. This is literally the big moment I think of the chapter, is the moment of realization for Rudius. Norn did something that I couldn't. And again, fully acknowledging the idea that they are completely different situations. The only similarity here is that the two of them ran into a problem that caused them to shut themselves off from people, and one came out of the door while the other one had to be kicked out by the brother. They're not the same situations. They're not the same problems. They're not the same age. They're not figuring things out the same way. But from Rudius's perspective, in his eyes, somebody who felt like that was a death knell, he believes this to be a massive accomplishment. This 10-year-old girl did something I couldn't do my entire last life. And that is amazing to him. That makes her, in his eyes, much more stronger. Paul and Aisha seemed to think that she was a clumsy, timid kid without special talents. But he had a very different opinion of her now. If he was half as strong as her, his first life wouldn't have turned out so miserably. It was impossible to know for sure. His situation was different than Norn's. Again, I love that he acknowledges this stuff. I love when characters, especially Rudius, acknowledge similarities, but always clarify, but they're different. Just like the idea of stating that you understand what somebody's going through, understanding there's differences, not having a full copy and paste situation. Even if Rudius figured out his own feelings, he may not have left his room in the end. That's an oof statement. Even recognizing the idea that even if he figured things out in his previous life, he probably would have stayed there still. There is an element of, I think what it's sort of saying here is there is an element of acknowledging the idea that, yes, if you became a shut-in, if you shut yourself up from life, even if the initial cause, say for instance, he looked out his window one day and all the people that bullied him are standing out there with signs saying, we're so sorry. We're very, very sorry. Please come back. We need you there. And he's like, okay, at least they acknowledged they were wrong. But do I want to leave? But do I want to run into another experience? Even if that's fixed, what if I go back out there and I run into a different experience? He kind of mentioned that earlier in the idea that, yeah, he could probably get over it and go back out, but then what if he gets beat down again and he comes right back in? The world was full of monsters to him. Maybe Rudius needed to be reborn and meet Roxy for that to be possible. Of course, Roxy's the greatest. Either way, he couldn't change the past. The relationships he broke could never be repaired. Here's where it starts hitting me personally. The relationships he broke could never be repaired, and he'd never know what was going through his brother's head back then. Still, he felt like something stuck between his teeth for a long time had finally broke free. If Nanahoshi managed to return to their old world, he'd have to ask her to take a message to his brother. Thanks for trying to get through to me back then, and I'm sorry. Oof. There is something to be said about having so much massive growth in a character, and then at some point you go, oh, but wait, there's more. But wait, there's more. Rudius sees growth through this. The focus here was Norn, but Norn's not the only one that benefited from this experience. Rudius did too. Because this put Rudius in a position where he finally seen what his brother was doing, and he wants to say, thank you for trying. It didn't work, but I still want to say, thank you. Thank you for trying to save me back there. Such a good few chapters. I was actually not really expecting to get through all of this in one video. And maybe I was kind of breezing through a lot of stuff, but this is such a massive moment in, I think, Norn, Rudius, and yes, technically a little bit of insight into Aisha. There's multiple things in here that I think are especially great. The main key thing here obviously being Norn. Finally seeing what has been going through. This is literally Edis's chapter for Norn. Let's be perfectly honest. It was the same situation with Edis way back there where we all thought that she's just following Rudius because she's obsessed with him and she's just wants to fight because she's violent. And then at some point you get the Edis chapter and suddenly you realize the entire time Edis has been afraid of being left behind. This is literally us getting the perspective of Norn and the idea that she's not just a snotty kid that hates Rudius because he punched Dad. Yes, she hated Rudius for punching Dad, but then it turns into fear. That's the cool thing. Just like with Edis, it turns from, she's just violent, turns into fear. It's the same thing here. Norn turns from anger to fear, a fear of Rudius himself and the fact that he's dangerous. And, okay, everybody's saying he's so powerful, nobody's going to speak up against him. But now I'm supposed to be expected to live with him, and what if he punches me like he punches Dad? Dad got onto him and he punched the crap out of him. What if I step out of line? Rudy's going to punch the crap out of me. It turns into fear. And then she loses anybody at her side that protects her. But like I've stated like 3 times now, I love how it transitions into this idea of not so much that she just hates the fact that she's compared to this guy that she hates, but eventually turns into the idea that Norn figured it out. I love that Norn figured it out. Yes, it took a lot of people basically saying, he's great. He's great. He's great. He's amazing. He's great. He tells the bullies to stop. He protects people. He's strong. He's so smart. Wait, nobody said you're wrong. Nobody corrected her. They just pointed out that you might be seeing this wrong. Eventually, she herself puts it together. Everybody can't be wrong. I'm wrong. And it turns into this moment of realization that literally breaks her because she's afraid of how she can reconcile that. And a 10-year-old kid to figure that out and figure out how to reconcile that's kind of a lot more difficult than an adult. Now, granted, depending on your age and how mature you are, some adults would just become stubborn and never want to change their minds, but Norn, it's a struggle because she just doesn't know where to start. And it makes her sick. And it makes her hide herself away. And from Rudius' perspective, that's a fear that she's going to be stuck there forever. I did that once, and you're going to be stuck there forever. It's a panic state for him. I think the more interesting thing about this is that it's like, it shows that Aisha was kind of nasty. But you can't blame, it's almost like it's hard to blame Aisha. But it almost kind of pegs it at this idea that I don't necessarily think that Norn was ever really looking down on Aisha. It really does make it feel like a one-sided battle here. It feels like it's Norn's on this side of the battlefield, and she has grandmother, and she's got, let's just even say Lilia, and Paul, and everybody's over on this side of the battlefield. And to Aisha, she's over here alone, and she's trying to look good. And there's all these insults being thrown at her. Through the grandmother, obviously, illegitimate child. Through Lilia, don't talk down to your sister. Your sister's above you. And so she's feeling like she has to compensate. And it seems like she does really nasty things to Norn. Constantly putting her down. Constantly overachieving over her. Rubbing her face in everything. Because, not Norn. Not because of what Norn did. What people around Norn did. Grandmother. Grandmother fires at Aisha. Aisha returns fire to Norn. Lilia says something to Aisha. Aisha fires back at Norn. It pretty much paints Aisha as the villain, let's be perfectly honest. Not that it doesn't make sense. Again, Aisha was treated terribly, and she felt the only way to prove herself was to be better than Norn. To constantly tell everybody, but why would you give that to Norn? I aced the exam. I did what I needed to do. I did what you expected of me. Why does she get something? Oh, we're going back to Millis. Just like them, Rudius likes her more. It's so super tragic. It's so screwed up. Again, in the end, to Norn, Aisha is the villain. And you can't really say otherwise. Because through both perspectives, because we've now gotten both perspectives of Aisha and Norn, Aisha has always been the aggressor. Norn hasn't. Norn has been constantly berated by Aisha, constantly berated by her grandmother. The only person that really hasn't is Lilia, besides whenever she finally needs to kind of tell Norn, stop, you're going too far. It's super tragic to really think about, especially after getting Aisha's perspective and thinking that Norn was living it up, and she wasn't. But I think Norn has sort of been kind of the more interesting elements of the story. And like I've said before countless times, I'm really excited to see where they take Norn from this point on because she's so normal. Whereas Aisha is a genius and has, yes, been dealing with the fact that she's illegitimate child. But yeah, it's the other aspect of this entire section that was super good is obviously Rudius pretty much living through his brother's experience. That's literally what this is. Which makes you kind of wonder, when that happened with Rudius, I wonder if his brother went after everybody. But yeah, it's literally putting Rudius in the perspective of the sibling on the outside looking in. This is what my brother went through. What did my brother say? What would my brother have said? But wait, that doesn't matter. Nothing he said helped me. But this must be what brother felt. This is what my brother was going through. What do I say? What do I do? How do I fix the situation? Because I don't want this to happen to her. Again, it's similar to what happened with him first meeting Nanahoshi. Nanahoshi's locking herself up. She doesn't want to experience this world. She's just dead set on going back. But this is damaging her, and I want her to come out. Obviously noting the fact that I'm doing exactly what everybody else was trying to do from the outside, knocking on my door. It's very fascinating how much this writer loves to get into the mindset of Rudius and the fact that he keeps experiencing an outsider's perspective of what happened to him in his previous life. Whether it be his parents knocking on the door saying, please come out and offering gifts and stuff to bribe him out, or even his brother who walked in the door, sat down for hours, staring at him and trying to tell him, please come outside, come eat lunch with me, do something. His brother didn't have to do that. It's obviously a sign that his brother was trying to help. There was nothing telling his brother that he had to do that. He was doing that because he legitimately wanted to help him. And now Rudius is experiencing that. And additionally, Rudius is experiencing for the first time that sibling urge to protect. This is my sister. I will destroy this entire classroom if I find out who did this. If I find out this whole classroom is full of a bunch of people that were laughing and pointing at her, Stone Cannon Flurry, buddies. It's just gonna come down on this room. But I like the fact that it even acknowledges the idea that he jumped to conclusions. He jumped to this and he shouldn't have. He embarrassed himself, jumped to a conclusion, nearly harmed people that were not even involved, all because he assumed this is all people from my past life. Which one of you tied her to the gate, stripped her down, and laughed at her? Which one? Super good set chapters though. Really super good. Super good stuff. Super emotional. I admit, I think the section with the brother really got me the most because, again, I have brothers. And obviously the moment of Norn finally breaking down was super good. It kind of happens quick. It kind of happens really quick. And I think that kind of keeps it from really kind of dragging out. But it still worked in the end. I'm happy the situation between them is finally cleared up. I want Norn to be happy finally. Can we have Norn be happy? Can we just have Norn have a happy life? Anyways, that's all I'm going to cover for the day. Sorry, I'm not gonna get into 6 and 7. Like I said before, I was kind of expecting to have that in its own thing. Shoot, we might even have 7 be its own thing in itself, but we'll see. But I hope you guys enjoyed this Mushoku Mondays as usual. If you did, make sure to go down below and hit that like button if you've not already. I really appreciate you guys. Thanks to everybody that dropped by for the premiere. That's in the chat. Hey, chat. Thanks to everybody that leaves comments if the comment section is open. All that stuff is greatly appreciated. Additionally, I greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel through Patreon or Super Thanks, Tips link, memberships on the channel. All that stuff helps out a lot. I greatly appreciate it. You guys mean so much to me. It's your guys' support that keeps this running, keeps this going, so that I can bring this content to you guys. And yes, greatly appreciate all the kind words from everybody. You guys' support means so much to me. You guys are great. And with all that said, until the next Mushoku Mondays, y'all take care. Maybe she hadn't adjusted to classes. Everything really worried him. Maybe she hadn't adjusted to her. Maybe she didn't adjust. Maybe she hadn't adjusted to her classes. It really. He was worried. Maybe Linnea with a as it seemed like a misguided attempt for them to be kind to him. For now, they just seemed like they had some sort of weird relation. It was all over the minute he locked himself in his previous. It was all over the moment he locked himself up in his life. It was over the moment he locked himself up. Things might be tough. They both felt silent. Rumors would go away, and she would keep being compared to him. Rumors would go away, and she'd keep. But that's not on the way. Rudius wondered if he'd ever. Just don't get her butt. Just tell her to get her butt back in class. Just tell her to get barge right in there and give him her. She didn't too. She challenged Norn in the classroom, and she challenged Norn on the classroom. She challenged Norn in the classroom and on the fields. At school, Aisha insisted on constantly complimenting with her. But even still, she couldn't pass an entrance except for when she fought with Norn. Maybe she was a nuisance to him. Maybe she was a nuisance to her. With fears of being dragged back into her father's, he fell silent again. Rudius felt silent again. And her throat